What we just did in the previous video was ad hoc testing. We just used what we knew. We wrote very special purpose code that tried to test our sort method. Now, the part that really was annoying was this piece of code. It's just tedious to write something like this. And imagining having to do this for everything, it seems like testing is just a job that we really want to outsource. Now, what I'm going to show you is how the JUnit library will save us the trouble of writing code like this, avoiding the possibility of little subtle bugs like the ones we just had, and making our code much simpler. So this entire paragraph of code I can replace with a single line, which looks like this. org.junit.assert equals input, or sorry, expected input. Okay. And then I'll erase this paragraph, and now when I run it, I'll get, oh, hey, exception in this thread. They differed in element 0, expected and, but was I. So it basically does exactly what our for loop did, but we didn't have to write all that for loop code. And what's more, this code is just dead simple. There's almost no room for any errors, unlike what we saw before. Now there is actually one tiny little issue here, and it's not a super important point, but I did want to bring it up. If you look here, you can see that this assert equals method is underlined. And in this case, if I mouse over it, IntelliJ will tell me that it has been deprecated. So if you don't know the phrase, deprecated is a word in programming, which means that it is something that is tolerated or supported, but not recommended. So in other words, at some point way back in the development of the JUnit library, they created a method called assert equals that takes two arrays of objects. And then later they decided they didn't like that anymore. And so we could, let's say assert equals JUnit arrays deprecated, figure out what's going on here, okay? So we go here, we can see assert equals object deprecated, use assert array equals. Okay, good, someone made some nice documentation, and they're saying that really this should be something, you should be saying assert array equals. Now if I run my code, I see that it does seemingly the exact same thing, and all that's happening here is that the library authors, they have marked the assert equals method as something that's old. And we don't really need to know what the difference is. I mean, maybe there's an interesting story there, but I'll just trust the library authors when they say it has been deprecated. So be aware, that'll occasionally happen when you're using someone else's library. You use a method, IntelliJ warns you, actually, hey, by the way, this is considered old, so please try and use something else instead. Now you might ask yourself, why didn't they just remove that method? Well, there's actually a really good answer. If you write code and publish it to the world and make methods public, you are saying to the world, hey, use this and I promise it'll work forever. People would be very angry if suddenly their test code no longer compiled simply because you decided you didn't like the name of a method or how it was organized before. So just a warning that whenever you're designing classes, you have to keep in mind that people are going to be using your code for a long time. And that's something we'll touch on later. Now the punchline there, we saw a bunch of little lessons along the way. The big lesson is that this big tedious piece of code here can be made much simpler. We can even increase the font size dramatically, right? So that we can see everything well. And in this case, we can use just a single line of code to replace this entire paragraph. JUnit testing, it's pretty good.